Good afternoon. I'm Charles Cottrell, President of St. Mary's University, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you here, to welcome our distinguished guest, Senator Menendez, and also our other distinguished guest, Evan Smith of Texas Tribune. They will be properly introduced momentarily. I want to especially welcome the St. Mary's University community and the members and board members of the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We are co-sponsoring this event. St. Mary's has a long tradition in public affairs. We are an engaged campus believing strongly in civic engagement and understanding what that means in our society. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce one of our own graduates, dear friend, to St. Mary's and to this community. He is President and CEO of the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. He has a long set of things he's done in the public sector, working in public service. And for the St. Mary's group, I'd like to suggest he is also the person who leads our neighborhood revitalization effort, and the degree to which we've been successful, we can lay at the leadership, his feet and his leadership. And I'd like you to join me in welcoming the CEO and President of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Ramiro Cavazos.
Thank you, Dr. Cottrell. Well, we're extremely pleased and honored to see each of you with us today. We're also especially blessed to be hosted by St. Mary's University. It is an institution that's foundation was in 1852, and we're great partners. We believe education is economic development in its organic or most organic form is a great partnership for a Chamber of Commerce. The Hispanic Chamber of Commerce was created here by the Cámara Mexicana, el Consulado Mexicano, as la Cámara Mexicana de Comercio on 5 de Mayo in 1929. So we ourselves are tenured in America's first Hispanic business organization, America's first Chamber of Commerce, with a focus on Latino business issues. Today's session is a continuation led by the policymakers of our board of directors and our great team and staff to bring issues of power and importance to our community. We are very honored to have a dynamic group of board of directors from different sectors of the community, and we're very pleased as a staff to work for them to grow our economic base. And with the census data that's coming forward and the great discussion related to immigration and, of course, our budget issues, we're very pleased today to have such a wonderful panel on the stage with us. They will be introduced by our own esteemed chairman of the board. He's a native of Del Rio, Texas. He is our volunteer leader, great supporter of many South Texas issues. He thinks regionally and at the same time leverages that with federal and state issues. He's a senior vice president with IBC Bank, based in Laredo, but with a strong presence in South Texas, in Texas and Oklahoma. I'm very honored that we have his leadership during these difficult times going through not just Texas, but America. And at this time, please join me in welcoming to the podium. He will be introducing our two guests today, our chairman of the board, Eddie Alderete.
Thank all of you for being here. We're truly blessed with what we have in this community, as Ramiro talked about, and we're very thankful. You know, as a community, we come together, our chambers come together, and we have an annual trek to Washington, D.C., where we're able to have a great conversation and discussion with all of our elected leaders. But a while back, we decided to also create a new effort by bringing some of those leaders here to our community to let them see items of interest, to understand, to visit with the members of our community, to hear firsthand the particular needs and issues that we face on a regular basis. And when it comes to our leaders, I want to specifically say two things. The first is that leadership isn't defined by what we say, it's defined by what we do. And I think that we're very blessed, and I think it's a perfect example of that saying, that leadership is defined by what we do, in our two guests, both our interviewee and our interviewer, in Senator Menendez and in Evan Smith. We were pleased to start this initiative back in February with Senator Lindsey Graham, and Evan was kind enough to come down from Austin and host the event, and so this is round two. Evan, thank you again for coming back, and Senator, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend some time with us this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome from New Jersey, Senator Robert Menendez, and from Austin, the Texas Tribune editor, Evan Smith.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it, sir. Yeah. Senator, welcome. Very nice to have you here, sir.
Great to be here.
I'm tempted to spend the whole time talking about Donald Trump, but maybe we can get to that later, as I know that at least part of his business is in your home state. I suspect you probably know him. I want to begin by talking about immigration, as we are in San Antonio, which is a microcosm of what Texas will become very soon, a city for which that issue is of paramount concern. And in fact, the mayor of San Antonio is not here today, I suspect, at least in part, because he's at the White House at a gathering that the president's put together to talk about immigration reform, along with former Governor Schwarzenegger and Mayor Bloomberg of New York. You have been a chief advocate for immigration reform over the years you've been in Congress. I wonder if you would tell us where we are on this issue, given the fact that not a whole lot of progress has been made in the first 2 years of the Obama administration.
Well, Evan, before I answer, let me just say I'm thrilled to be here at St. Mary's, thrilled to be here with the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and to be back in San Antonio, and happy to know that your family's still living in New Jersey.
They are.
So all politics is local.
My mom says hi.
And this part of the room, you'll excuse me because it's a little difficult to turn around, so if I don't glance at you, it's not because I'm ignoring you. On the question of immigration, you know, it is my view that it is in the national interests of the United States to have comprehensive immigration reform. And the reason for that is I cannot secure the country if I do not know who is here to pursue the American dream versus who might be here to challenge it. And when you have 12 million people who are sitting in the shadows, you cannot achieve that. The reality is that there are whole sectors of our economy that are affected positively by immigrants. If you had chicken for dinner last night, it was probably picked by the cut-up hands of an immigrant worker. If you had fruit for breakfast this morning, it was probably picked by the bent back of an immigrant worker. If you, in fact, as I did, slept in a hotel here last night, it was probably cleaned on the bent knee of an immigrant worker. And if you have a loved one who's infirmed, they're probably being taken care of by the warm heart and steady hand of an immigrant worker. In an economy that is still challenging, and yet so many sectors of this economy, I'm for any American who wants to do any job first, but the reality is there are whole sectors of our economy that are being buoyed by immigrants in this country, and they're also risk takers, and they're also individuals who largely are contributors. So our drive for comprehensive immigration reform, in my mind, is about the nation's economy, the nation's security, and also about family reunification. Unfortunately, there are voices in the Congress that have a much different view. And in that respect, getting to a common ground position has been a challenge. There are those who say that we must do everything necessary to guarantee that the border is absolutely, that has no porous opportunities to it, no crossings whatsoever. The reality is that even though we are at record expenditures, we have more Border Patrol than ever before. We sent $600 million last year in additional funds. We have more troops on the border than ever before. We have aerial surveillance of the border. We have fences along the border. The reality is that, and border crossings are down, and yet there's still not enough for some people in terms of moving forward on a comprehensive immigration reform package. At the end of the day, we will not meet the challenges of undocumented immigration unless we have a comprehensive reform that deals with both the push and pull factors that are part of immigration. So unless we can create some bipartisan spirit to move forward. Certainly in the present environment with a divided Congress and a 60-vote threshold for contentious issues in the United States Senate under the filibuster rule, we're not going to be able to move forward on that. And so many of us have called upon the President to consider administrative options that would give some relief, particularly to families and to DREAM Act students, which we think are critical to both the community and to the nation's future. So that's more or less in broad strokes where we're at.
I'm interested to hear you say that you've looked to the President for leadership, because in fact the President talked both during the campaign and in his first year in office about the idea that immigration reform was an item near the top of his agenda. Obviously things changed. We didn't expect to spend our time talking about Libya or many of the other challenges that the President has faced. And obviously the budget, 3 wars, healthcare reform are all first of mind for the President. But the reality is his leadership is probably necessary, wouldn't you agree, for this to move forward? President Bush made an attempt, a good faith attempt, many believe, to move immigration reform. He faced a political challenge from his own party that ultimately made that not happen. But doesn't it really begin not with Congress but with the President demonstrating that he believes this is an issue that Congress and others around the country should take up?
Well, there's no question that to get immigration reform accomplished, you're going to need presidential leadership. But you're also going to need common ground in terms of having the votes that are necessary to make it happen in the Senate and the House of Representatives. And I'll be honest with you, even with that leadership exerted in a manner that I'd like, I look at the challenges right now before us in the House, and there are members of the House, including from the state of Texas, who have a much different view about what immigration is all about. And so it would be incredibly challenging to envision a comprehensive immigration legislation being achieved in this Congress. Hence, our drive to get the President to consider administrative relief that is available
in lieu of
certainly would be controversial.
Right.
And look, you know, we're standing ready to vote, support and vote an effort that is comprehensive. You've had Senator Graham here. He and I have discussed that as a possibility. But getting the common ground that is necessary on a controversial issue with the votes that will be critical is the only way that it's going to happen. And while, yes, presidential leadership will be part of it, it also, I think, takes a different mindset in the public debate that we are having right now. And that public debate is focused all on enforcement and none on the questions of how we bring together family reunification, drive challenges, meeting challenges in our economy, and how we do enforcement but do it intelligently. I have a real problem, the last point I'll make.
Yes, sir.
When, in fact, I have nearly 200 cases, far beyond my state, but 200 cases of either United States citizens or legal permanent residents unlawfully detained in immigration raids, some for long periods of time. So who among us is willing to be a second-class citizen in this country? It's certainly not I, nor do I believe that anyone else who is a United States citizen or legal permanent resident by enforcement measures should face themselves in a challenge in which they actually could be detained even as they have citizenship in this country. And yet, those are 200 cases that we know about. There's a report that has come out of, I think, the Yale Law School that did a review of immigration detention centers in the country and found a much broader scope of individuals
probably a higher
who are
number than
either
that.
U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. It is fundamentally wrong. So we need to enforce the law, but we need to do it in a way that does not violate the constitutional rights of individual citizens.
Let me ask you a direct question about your colleagues in Congress who are opposed to the kind of immigration reform that you're describing. Is it racism? That was alleged when President Bush made an attempt to pass immigration reform, and again, members of his own party shot that down. And at the time, there was discussion that perhaps there were some people who were not so much opposed to immigration reform, but the idea that the Hispanic community would be on equal footing in this country. I want to ask you if members of Congress, Republicans in the Senate and in the House, if it's racism that is behind their opposition to immigration.
Well, I wouldn't say that, and I don't know what their ultimate motives are. I would just simply say that if you believe in securing the country, security comes by making people come forth, filing with the government their presence, going through a criminal background check, paying their taxes, learning English, adjusting their status in this country, earning their way to earned legalization. So if you're about law enforcement, You want to make sure who is here in a way that ultimately is in pursuit of the American dream. Secondly, you want to make them earn it, and you want them to pay their taxes, and the only way you'll do that is if you can have them in a process by which you can ultimately pursue. And thirdly, if you believe in the private sector and helping the private sector meet some of its challenges, part of that challenge is human capital. And so therefore, how do you meet some of the human capital needs? So it seems to me that what many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say that they are advocates for seem to fall foursquare on the purposes of comprehensive reform versus strictly enforcement only.
I'm interested when you say that we have to create an environment in which people who are here undocumented are willing to come forward, enter the process, and build a life for themselves on the path to citizenship. I'm moved to ask you about the so-called Arizona-style laws. In Texas, where various bills are before the legislature that would implement something similar to what's in Arizona, in our legislature. I wonder if you believe that those laws are an impediment to people who are now living in the shadows, as you describe them, coming forward. People for fear that if they're out just doing normal business, that they're suddenly at risk of being discovered and sent back to.
Well, Evan, I have to be honest with you. The Supreme Court, I mean, not the Supreme Court, but the federal courts have ruled that clearly immigration enforcement is something in the domain of the federal government and not in the domain of state governments, number one. Number two is, to be honest with you, how many times do you think you'll get stopped and asked your citizenship status versus how many times some of the people in this audience will be asked their status? The reality is that in my mind, it is not acceptable to have state enforcement of immigration laws which lead to the potential for discrimination against individuals simply because of the class, the universe in which they are in, the language which they speak, the way which they look, or the communities in which they reside.
You buy the racial profiling argument?
I buy the fact that there is clearly, by not opinion, but by facts, that too many people who are U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents, including a young Mexican-American Iraq war veteran who was detained unlawfully, born in this country, detained, served his country, detained unlawfully in violation of the constitutional rights. That is not acceptable in the name of enforcement.
Let me move the conversation away from immigration to the budget. We've had, over the last couple of weeks, for those of us who care about this stuff, an enormous amount of tumult and theater over the budget. First, Congressman Ryan's proposal, and then the President's speech. I want to ask you to talk about those two. Obviously, the debate now has moved beyond the government shutdown to what we're going to do next, and you have before all of us very different plans. Congressman Ryan's plan would cut $6 trillion, from the budget through a variety of means, including, most controversially, some say, ending Medicare as we know it. The President has his own plan, which would cut less of the budget, and controversially does so in part by raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans. I'd like you to analyze for us what you know about both these plans and tell us where you come down.
Well, we are going to have an epic debate about what type of America we want. What type of America are we going to be? It seems to me that I have always said in my public service that if you show me your budget, I'll show you your values. We may not think of it in that way, but all of us have a budget, even when we don't structure it as a budget. It is our income by however we derive it, by work, by maybe some investments, some interest we've made, and then it is our expenses, the home we keep for our family, the tuition we pay for our children to come to a great institution like St. Mary's, the charitable contributions we make either at church or synagogue or to organizations we believe are worthy of their causes. Those are an expression of our personal values. And the nation's budget is a reflection of our collective values as a country. So I think where there is unanimity is that both Democrats and Republicans believe that you cannot have debt continue to rise as a percent of GDP and be a prosperous country, which means you have to meet that debt challenge. The question is, how do you meet that debt challenge? And there are two clearly different views. Congressman Ryan and the budget passed in the House largely says that we will meet that challenge by doing several things that I think undermine the nation's future competitive abilities and undermines the very essence of a society that isn't out for each individual but looks collectively in a sense of community. What do I mean by that? So he cuts a little over $4 trillion over a decade. He basically privatizes Medicare as the very essence for those who are seniors in our communities and rely upon it as their essence of their health care. I know that from my mother, who passed away a year and a half ago after bitter years of raging against Alzheimer's. And for her, the quality of her life in the twilight of her life would not have, she would not have lived with the dignity that she deserved, but for Medicare and what I was able to contribute to her. The reason we created Medicare in the first place was because seniors could not afford or have insurance in the private marketplace to take care of their health needs. And so the end result is that he would privatize Medicare by going from a defined benefit, which means if you qualify, here's the standard of benefits you receive, to a defined contribution, which means you no longer have a guaranteed benefit, you have a contribution in a voucher to an insurance company that you'll choose. Of course, the problem with that is that an insurance company that is looking at a universe of insured who are older and more likely to have many more claims than a younger universe is going to face a higher challenge. Either you're going to offer them less services or there's going to be higher premiums, because insurance is about spreading risk at the end of the day. So if I spread it over a longer pool, I'm going to end up having a lot better. So the question is, just to finalize on the differences, privatizing Medicare, giving a voucher which even in today's market doesn't meet the Medicare benefits that one would receive, taking $1 trillion of the cuts into tax cuts that go unpaid for and unstimulated in terms of the future growth and revenue reoccurring, takes big cuts on education so that students coming to institutions like St. Mary's would see their Pell and Perkins grants dramatically reduced, and says that our energy future continues to be dependent upon oil instead of creating new renewable energy sources here at home. Yep. That's one vision. The President's vision is a little bit broader. It also cuts $4 trillion over 12 years instead of 10 years. It doesn't say that Medicare has to go for the security of our seniors. It does make reforms in it in terms of delivery systems and payment process. And it says that everybody in our country has to share at a critical time in our country. And that means that instead of $1 trillion worth of tax cuts that would give an additional $200,000 to every millionaire and billionaire, that there is shared sacrifice in the country, so that the middle class is already sharing significantly. Those who have had wealth in our country, and we applaud them for their wealth, but it's a moment that the nation needs their help by not continuing the Bush tax cuts. And we take other elements of the tax code where there are tax expenditures and loopholes and deductions, close some of them, and then we also reduce spending on both programs and some defense elements that even Secretary Gates, a Republican, held over from President Bush and participating with as the Secretary of Defense under President Obama, has outlined that can be done with still preserving the nation. Those are two fundamentally different views.
Right, and I want to come to the presidents in a second, but I want to go back to what you said about the degree to which ending Medicare as we know it puts our seniors at risk. Senator Cornyn, our senator from Texas, over the last couple of days noted, and journalists have said he's actually right about this, that there are elements of Congressman Ryan's plan that are materially no different than the Obama health care reform plan. In fact, one of the tenets of the Obama health care reform plan was to turn over a lot of what we now pay for from the standpoint of government insurance. We're going to require private, vouchers and private insurance that we're going to do for younger people, what the Ryan plan is talking about doing for older people. That an element of the Ryan plan is actually not that different from what the president is proposing in health care reform. And Senator Cornyn has said, why are the Democrats complaining so much about this aspect of it when they supported what President Obama put forward in health care reform?
Well, there's fundamentally a difference. First of all, what we do is say to every American who doesn't have insurance today, and for the Hispanic community, unfortunately, that is a disproportionate share of America that does not have insurance today, is that we will work to give you a subsidy You will go in the private marketplace and choose the insurance you want on that exchange, which is basically a series of private insurance companies competing with each other but having to live under certain standards like not having pre-existing conditions or lifetime caps. And that you will choose the ability of the company. If you have insurance, fine, you get to keep your insurance. If you don't have insurance or you want to switch, you'll be able to do so. But a universe that is that large, millions of people who are in many respects younger and less likely to have claims, means that the risk pool gets spread. That's what insurance is all about. In the universe where you take seniors who are already at an advanced age and more likely to have health claims for benefits at the end of the day, and say give them a voucher and go to the private sector, well, that doesn't work unless you're in this huge pool at the end of the day, and that's not simply the way it works. So if I'm an insurer,
costs are higher for seniors.
Of course, if I'm an insurer, well, as you get older, unfortunately, you know, I know this every day. The body breaks down a little bit, you know. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, when you get much older, it continues to be a challenge. So the bottom line is that you're going to have higher costs for one pool of individuals versus another pool. So if I'm going to take that and I'm going to say I'm going to give you a voucher, that voucher in real dollars is less than anything will buy me on the marketplace now for a similar set of benefits now in this marketplace. And then the insurance industry is going to depend upon this limited universe to achieve their goals of being, you know, they want to make money at the end of the day. It's not philanthropic. And have a universe that's going to have more claims. You know, I don't see how, you know, that dog won't hunt. So
you reject the senator's analogy?
Well, I think that it is apples and oranges. Saying that giving a citizen who isn't in that senior age bracket with more claims the opportunity to go into the private insurance market, who has no insurance right now. Medicare recipients have insurance. So you have no insurance right now, to be able to get access to insurance, and if they qualify, get a subsidy to it, and have those insurance companies be able to give an affordable product, because the universe of who their insurance and the risk of who they have is extended dramatically versus a much smaller defined universe, large but nonetheless a defined universe with greater claims, is a whole different ball of wax.
Different deal. Let me ask you about the president's plan then. You said that the tax increase represented an opportunity for all Americans to share in the sacrifice at a time when we need them to. But in fact, what the president's plan is doing is not asking all Americans to share in the sacrifice. It's only the wealthiest Americans. The president had an opportunity to advocate for ending the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans back in December, but as part of the deal he cut after the election, he declined to do so. Now he comes back 4 or 5 months later and says, wait a minute, forget what happened back in December. Now I do want to raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans. My question is, are you prepared and is your party prepared to get behind the president? Because what the Republicans will say is the difference between the two parties is they want to raise your taxes, or they want to raise the taxes of wealthiest Americans. That's been a hard thing to get behind.
So, Evan, I would say, let's look at the audience. How many of you are a millionaire? Raise your hand. Well, either you don't want to admit it, or you're, or
they don't want to pay higher taxes. I think.
Well, just for the record, no one raised their hand. So I believe that, you know, first of all, it's interesting how we use the wording, raise taxes. This is basically a tax cut that has existed, and we're talking about foregoing it moving forward. Now, it's true that the president accepted continuing an extension for 2 years on the tax cuts, including for the wealthiest, because in this economy, he was not about to allow the middle class, which is the overwhelming part of Texas and America, to see their taxes rise in terms of not getting that tax cut that had existed before. So this is the universe that is more likely to spend in our economy, that has needs in this economy, that will also create a ripple effect of the expenditure of their money. Now, to give someone who is a millionaire or a billionaire, to give Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and a whole class of people who fall in that category an additional break on their taxes at a time in which the nation has needs is something that's not sustainable, especially if you don't pay for it. And if you largely have to remember, we had over 8 years of the quote-unquote Bush tax cuts that went unpaid for. Because when you have a tax cut, it's just like in your family's budget that I was referring to before, right? You have revenue. Well, largely the government receives revenue by a combination of taxes and fees. So if I take the tax away, if I take the revenues that come from that, that means I have a hole in the budget. So either I replace that in some other way,
Right.
or I have to cut spending in order to offset that, that something has to give.
Yeah.
And so if you have tax cuts unpaid for, and they are unpaid for the wealthiest people in the country, I'm not sure that under the Ryan plan to give another $200,000 in tax cuts to people who are millionaires and billionaires is ultimately how we meet both long-term debt
Right.
questions. So I look at them, and I've talked to many wealthy people in the country, and they haven't said to me, I need another tax cut. What they have said to me is, if the nation calls upon me, and if we're having a tax structure that makes sense,
Right.
I am happy to help meet the nation's challenge. And I think if we call upon those individuals in that way, we are going to find an overwhelming number of them willing to not get a tax cut, but to forego a benefit that they have been receiving.
That does sound, with respect, Senator, I think you've done an artful job of branding this. I mean, to forego a tax cut that they have been receiving is a tax increase. Right? A lot, what those
To me, a
people-
tax increase is if I go now
Yeah.
and I raise your rate above and beyond what you're paying.
Right, but the
That's
fact
a
is
tax
the
increase too.
individuals who are making more than $250,000 a year will pay more taxes. That is a tax
Well,
increase.
that's a different thing.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, I don't think that there is unanimity of opinion with the President on the 250 range, because that's a lot of middle-class families in different parts
What would
of
the
our country.
Menendez plan be?
Well, you know, the Menendez plan that Senator Schumer and I offered when we were having the debate last year is $1 million or more, you have to forego
You'd be
your
comfortable.
benefit.
You'd be comfortable with that.
At least $1 million, because as I say, average people in New Jersey or here know whether or not they're a millionaire.
Right.
And if they're not a millionaire and they're wondering whether or not, well, is this about me or is this about millionaires and billionaires?
Yeah.
And we would have a huge revenue increase by denying just simply millionaires and billionaires an additional benefit.
Right.
Not to mention that millionaires and billionaires, you know, it's not just the rate, it's the effective rate, which means what do you actually pay after all your deductions, credits, and other benefits under the code. And as we have seen, you know, there's some very significant entities in this country that have not paid a dime to the public good. You'd wonder about that as an average citizen.
Well,
who is
let
paying.
me ask you about that. Senator Cornyn was in Austin yesterday with me, and he made the observation that 47%, this is, I don't know where his statistic came from, but this is the one he quoted, 47% of Americans pay no taxes. I noted to him that GE and a number of major corporations also pay no taxes, and that rather than raising taxes or foregoing a tax cut, the continuation of a tax cut, there might be an effort expended by the Congress to go after corporations that obviously made quite a lot of money last year but aren't paying any taxes. What about that?
Well, look, I think we are in the midst of the Finance Committee of looking at tax reform in general.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm an advocate of looking at lower corporate rates, but offsetting them with tax expenditures, meaning eliminating the deductions, loopholes, and credits
Yep.
that have been accrued. Because therefore, I think you create the opportunity for long-term competitiveness globally, but at the same time, you derive the revenue that you need and you offset. This is paying for a tax cut, right?
Senator
in
Cornyn's
my
with you
mind,
on this, by the way. He said a version of this, in fact, yesterday. Lower tax rates, but then also
But
close
by
the
the
loop.
same token, I think that in tax reform, you have to have a set of circumstances where the average citizen, in terms of that the effective rate that they're paying,
Yep.
versus a company in the effective rate that they're paying, there should be some equity at the end of the day.
Yep.
And so we both, whether we are a corporate citizen or an individual citizen, are benefiting from the country in the services it provide, the roadways that for which products are transported across, the security that is provided to the country, the fight that we have in intellectual property rights throughout the world, in our trade agreements, and a whole host of other things. The government is doing that. So at some time, if the citizen is paying for that, it seems to me that the corporate citizen is also part of that as well. And so it's the effective tax rate, what you actually pay. I was in another part of Texas earlier this week, and I had someone who was telling me, you know, Senator, I'm actually only paying 15%. He was marveling at this, 15% effective rate. Somebody does very well. Because I really don't think I should be paying 15% effective rate when the people who work for me are in the 20-some-odd percentile effective rate.
This is a very unselfish person.
He is. But he gets to, you know, take the deductions, the benefits, to do all of the transactions under the code. So at the end of the day, This is about tax fairness, tax equity,
Right.
and for my part also tax simplification, because the code has gotten way too. It shouldn't be what accounting can you afford to figure out how you pay less. It should be a system that is fairer, that is simpler at the end of the day, and that shares the responsibility across the board. That is not something that is happening today.
I mentioned Senator Cornyn yesterday was in Austin. He was, during the last cycle, and is again during this cycle, the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. You, sir, were his counterpart on the Democratic side. During the last cycle, that baton has now been passed to Senator Murray. In the last cycle, the Republicans walked up to the edge of taking back the majority in the Senate. And I asked Senator Cornyn yesterday, do you believe that the Republicans can take back the majority next time? Guess what he said? He said yes. He observed that 23 Democrats are up for election in the next cycle, only 10 Republicans. And I asked him which Democrats were most likely to be targeted, and he said, well, basically, North Dakota, Nebraska, and Montana are ours, he said. And so we only need to find one more net gain in order to take back the majority. I want to ask you to respond to that. Is he overly optimistic? And where are your opportunities in the next cycle? Even though you're not the chair, you certainly know that landscape better than most people. Can you talk about that?
Well, I am not the chair.
But you do know the landscape better than most people. So.
I am not the chair any longer,
Yeah.
but I will say this. First of all, John Cornyn was a worthy opponent in the last cycle. But what he fails to remind people is that in the process, we had three things that or at least certainly one of those things that no chair has ever had to face, that I had to face, which is the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United unlocking corporate spending in federal elections. For the last 25 or 30 years, the federal law has prohibited corporate spending in federal elections. Supreme Court decided that a corporation has the same right as an individual to go spend an election. So basically, we faced 70, when I say we, Senate Democrats faced $70 million in corporate expenditures just against Senate Democrats. We faced midterm election history. Midterm election history, going back to the Civil War, means whoever the president's party is in power loses seats. And that has been the history since the Civil War.
W. Bush accepted.
One exception.
One exception.
And in addition to that, notwithstanding all of that, as the chairman last year, I and Democrats beat 80 years of history. Since 1930, World War II, every time the House of Representatives has flipped from one party to the other, the Senate has flipped from one party to the other. Last year was the first time that the House of Representatives flipped from one party to the other, but the Senate did not in 80 years, 1930, World War II. So I take that as a personal distinction of my chairmanship.
Sure.
All responsible for it.
Well, I think it's perfect. Look, yeah,
but on a serious note,
credit for that.
So I tell you that because looking at the
Right.
landscape forward, actually, if you look at all of that history, Republicans should have already been in the majority.
Right.
So a lot of history was going their way, and a lot of history was going us, and yet we are still in the majority. I think that this election cycle is going to be one in which Democrats have some real opportunities. We have opportunities in Massachusetts. Senator Brown is up for re-election.
There are no polls in Massachusetts, Senator, that show any Democrat within range of Senator Brown.
One of the things I learned about as the chairman of the DSCC is that there was a place called Delaware in which we lost, and the senator from Delaware, which we were supposedly going to lose, and the senator from Delaware is a Democrat.
He's a Democrat.
So the reality is that a lot happens, especially in a presidential election year, where there will be surge voters, and that will change the dynamics of races in many parts of the country. The Tea Party continues to be a problem for the Republicans because they dominate totally in the Republican primaries, not in Democratic primaries. They very often give a candidate that is out of the mainstream for the general election. So they continue to be challenges for the Republican Party in many of their primaries. So I think the reality is that it's not just simply in the numbers, that there are 23 Democrats versus, I think, 10 or so Republicans, but that, in fact, the dynamics of presidential elections, who's going to be the Republican candidate, how well is he going to run against Barack Obama, where's the economy at? There's a lot of factors here. So I would not be so clear to say they're going to win. And I believe John Tester will win in Montana, so I'm not sure that John has his equation.
It's correct. I want to get to the 2012 case and then open it up for questions to the audience, but I want to stay with the Senate races in particular because here in Texas we have a Senate race coming up to replace, provided that Senator Hutchison means it this time, and she is in fact quitting. I guess we won't know until it actually happens. We have a race that's going to feature a Republican candidate to be determined and apparently a Democratic candidate. There was some sense that there might not actually be a Democratic candidate of credibility and seriousness. And Senator Murray, your successor, has now said that the Democrats may have identified one. It turns out to be Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez, retired, 33-year veteran of the Army, was commander of coalition forces in Iraq from San Antonio, living in San Antonio now. Do you know anything about General Sanchez? Do you have a point of view about this that you'd like to offer us?
Well, I know General Sanchez. I think he did extraordinary service to the nation. I think he is an extraordinary individual. I think he has a life story that is compelling. I think he is Texan through and through. And I think he'd be a great United States Senator should he decide to run.
Have you had any conversations with General Sanchez about running?
I don't share my conversations with individuals.
Okay. Okay, well, let's leave that there, then. That's fine. Let me ask you finally about the 2012 race before we invite the audience into the conversation. You said that a lot of what will happen with the Senate races next cycle will depend upon President-elect Trump and other candidates. Only for the press, it would be the gift that keeps on giving, wouldn't it, if he ends up winning? What's going to happen on the Republican side? Can you analyze the Republican field for us and give us a word or two about how you think the president has done as he gets into a re-election mode? Let's start with the Republican field.
Wow. You know, I don't know. I wish Donald Trump all the success in the world, so I'd like him to be the Republican candidate. So, you know.
I bet you would.
The only person who beats him in my mind would be Sarah Palin. So I'd like her to be the Republican candidate. But after that, look, you know, I'm not much of a commentator on the Republican side of the equation. I'm not quite sure of the universe that is out there. And I mean, I know who the candidates are. I'm not sure what their standing will be. I think none of them is really a quote-unquote national figure, not yet anyhow. I think none of them are going to, some of them are going to have challenges within a Republican primary meeting the purity that the Republican primary process seems to call for. So that will be interesting.
No one is the toughest of the group. You don't look at any one of them and go, this person would be the toughest one for the president to face.
I think the potentially toughest person is not in the field, at least not as yet.
And who's that? Is it your governor, Governor Christie?
No. I think it would be Jeb Bush if he decided, if he wanted to run. But I don't really see him doing it. So, with reference to the president, look, I look at this president and I say the following thing. In 2008, we had 2008, before Barack Obama was elected president. Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Secretary Paulson, the Secretary of the Treasury under President Bush, came before members of the Banking Committee, of which I'm one, and leadership, and said, we are going to have a series of financial institutions collapse in this country. If they collapse, they'll create systemic risk to the entire country's economy, and every American will feel the consequences of it. And I remember asking Chairman Bernanke at that meeting, I said, Mr. Chairman, surely you must have enough tools at the Federal Reserve to get us through this period of time and think more proactively about how we meet, because what you're asking us to do is incredibly unprecedented. And he said the most chilling thing I've ever heard in 30-some-odd years of public life. He said to me, Senator, if you and your colleagues don't act in the next 2 weeks, we will have a global, his words, not mine, a global financial meltdown. And I said to him, Mr. Chairman, that would mean a new depression. And he said, if we allow it to happen, it would. Markets would pancake across the globe. There'd be a run of the banks, and you'd have a depression unlike this country went through under Roosevelt. Now, Bernanke, whatever you think about his economic policies, he is not a politician. He is an academician. His expertise is in depressionary economics, how the country got into the last depression, what worked and didn't work to get us out of it. So when he said this, it had all the more meaning. That was 2008, September 2008, before Barack Obama took office. So we talk about a deep recession. The nation was on the verge, had we not acted, of a new depression. And then Barack Obama takes office in late January of 2009. And in the first month, before he even swears the oath of office, he's lost 750,000 jobs. In February, he's trying to assemble a cabinet. He lost another 750,000 jobs. In March, when he finally gets to send a program to the Congress on stimulus and recovery, another 750,000 jobs. In the first quarter of 2009, based upon the policies that we inherited, which was 2 wars raging abroad, unpaid for, tax cuts unpaid for, a new entitlement program unpaid for, and a marketplace that instead of being a free market was a free-for-all market without any restrictions that cost collective risk to America. And so that's what this man inherited, and then in the first quarter before he gets actually to operate, he's lost 2 million more jobs. So if I look at that, at what this president inherited, and where we are, where we had negative GDP growth to positive GDP growth, where we had negative job growth, now have positive job growth, when I look at some of the landmark legislation that will, I think, inure to the benefit of the country in the days ahead, I think he'll have a good story to tell. He's still working, however, as we all are. When I go to work every day, I don't think about making Barack Obama a two-term president. Unlike Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, who says his whole effort, his whole focus is to make Barack Obama a one-term president, my focus is how do we grow this economy? How do we get lending to take place in the private sector in our communities for access to capital? How do we get people back to work? How do we create greater prosperity? If we do those things, the nation will be better off and Barack Obama can be reelected. If we're thinking about who gets elected the next president of the United States at a critical time for the country, that's the wrong way to be thinking. That's not the way I go to work every day.
Okay. This portion of the conversation is over. Let us acknowledge and thank Senator Menendez for his time. Wonderful, sir. Thank you. You okay to take some questions now? Sure. Ramiro, we have a few moments for questions. I hope we'll begin with you, and then we have microphones to either side. Please step forward and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, Senator Menendez, for that great discussion. We have a couple of questions that have been submitted by some of our members. We're membership